Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Williams, Product Marketing Manager at Cision, and also your host for today's webinar. And today we're going to be looking at three powerful media engines: earned, owned, and paid, and more specifically, why they should be integrated and how integrating these can bring better business outcomes. So within this hour, we will examine the key that earned media holds to unlocking greater success for paid and owned counterparts by helping teams to better understand earned audiences, demonstrate how earned media drives business KPIs, and how integrated campaigns can drive better, more measurable outcomes. I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today, and we hope that you'll take away some really valuable insights and ideas that you can apply at your own organization. So first, before we get into everything, I just want to do a couple of quick housekeeping items. So first, you can see the hashtag that we've got on the main slide here. So that's integrating earned, paid, and owned. So please keep an eye on the Cision UK Twitter handle, and also please feel free to get involved as well in the conversation yourself. You'll also see a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So if you have any questions throughout the session, you can submit them here, and we'll leave some time at the end as well for you to answer as many of those for you as possible. And finally, an on-demand copy of the recording will also be made available afterwards, so we'll send this to you all after the session. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our brilliant panel of speakers. So today we're joined by Anil Ranchod, who is the head of press and PR at the Chartered Management Institute, as well as Emma Bravo, who is the communications director from Pan Macmillan. So thank you both for joining us today, and I really look forward to hearing your thoughts on how you've been integrating the media mix at your own organizations shortly. So before we go into that discussion, first of all, we'd like to hear from you that you are watching around how you've integrated your own PR and marketing in your own organizations. So we're just going to put together a quick poll for you out now. So I'll just launch this poll. And if you can all take a second just to quickly answer that poll and let us know how integrated your own organization's PR and marketing is. So I can just see a few of those coming through now. Great. Okay. That's pretty much everyone. So we'll go ahead and we'll end the poll. And we'll share those results. So what's really great to see actually from that is that a lot of people are in the we're working on it stage. So it's great to see that so many people are already in the kind of more advanced stages of that. And we also have quite a lot of people in the sort of somewhat integrated and some in the not at all. And I think those people are definitely not alone. And that's not an uncommon problem that we've seen in the industry. And the way we're seeing things at the moment is something like what you can see here on the screen, which is that owned, shared, and paid are often very, very integrated and working together. And then you've often got earned media on the right-hand side here, which is a little bit more siloed and not as involved in those conversations. So a few years back, Cision and PR Week teamed up to conduct an industry survey. And one of the key findings that came out of that was that 2/3 of comms teams were running very siloed campaigns. However, since then, we've seen a lot of progress, and a recent study that we ran with the CMO Council showed that 7 out of 10 brand leaders felt that their marketing, comms, and senior leadership teams were much more aligned. That said, if you take a deeper look into that study, it still highlights a bit of a disconnect, particularly in the lack of shared goals and objectives. And the result of this is that organizations often have fractured messaging, which is something that we're going to touch on a little bit today, and in particular, the value of having consistent messaging across paid, earned, and owned campaigns. So as I've said, the industry has made an awful lot of progress when it comes to integrating across paid, earned, and owned. And we're hearing this a lot at Cision at the moment around comms teams that are better aligning with the marketing team, and more organizations that are having a PR layer to their marketing campaigns. We're also hearing more around marketing and comms better aligning on KPIs and measurements. So as we know, the way that we think about measurement in PR has changed over the recent years. And with more robust measurement being used across PR and comms, we're naturally seeing better alignment with the way that the marketing team has also been reporting on business impact. So there's many ways that we can get to this more integrated solution, but we've outlined here some of the key things that we think need to be done in order to get to that state. So first of all, being aligned at the very initial stages of strategy development, then having a shared definition of what success looks like to all teams, and then finally having a very consistent message across all channels is something that we think is a really great place to start. So the way that we can get to this place can obviously vary massively. And I think actually this is a good time for us to start to hear from some of our panel to share some of the experiences of how they've gone through this and how they've integrated campaigns within their own organizations. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Emma. So I'd like to welcome Emma. So thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks, Luke. Sorry, I was saying my throat's going somewhat with early hay fever, so I apologise and I will stay on the water. But hello, I'm Emma Bravo and I'm Communications Director at Pan Macmillan. We're a general book publisher for really wide-ranging authors such as Danielle Steele, Don DeLillo and Marcus Rashford. 10 years ago now, we completely integrated our PR and marketing functions. Now, I come from a PR background, but I feel that these many years later, I've moved really naturally between one function and the other. I encouraged the same from my team, and in fact, many of my team work across PR and marketing, running 360-degree campaigns. I'm a complete convert to this collaborative way of working. I think excuse me, it offers the opportunity to be highly strategic and to be far more creative and plan longer campaigns and crucially save money. With marketing budgets being cut widely this year, and that's been a lot of my last few months, out-of-home advertising has been devalued as we work from home. This is surely the future direction of PR and marketing. So when Pan Macmillan integrated the departments, we talked about how PRs know and work the story. And of course, books are a story gift for PRs. For years, we have worked every opportunity in the book and every angle of a campaign to reach every reader. Whilst marketers have traditionally defined a core audience and messaging has been tailored to that. In PR, I think we've been polyphonic, talking to consumers in multiple parts of the media and tailoring our message. I think we need to remember our core audience, but as budgets are spent in increasingly digital spheres, marketers are increasingly working in a way that has been long championed by PR. Today, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of how the marketer and I worked together to reposition and rebrand the author Joanna Trollope to a younger readership, whilst continuing to speak to her core audience. I should say that we ran this campaign pre-COVID, and our out-of-home advertising decisions would look very different this year. Can we go on to the first slide? In fact, oh, hang on. Yeah. Firstly, we needed to establish our objectives. This was a high-profile author who had made a very visible move to our publishing house from a competitor. So our performance was going to be monitored across the trade. So there's a bit of corporate PR in there as well as consumer. So creating a #1 bestseller was absolutely paramount. We also knew that we needed to find younger readers if we were to maintain her best-selling status for future books. And this was an opportunity to rebuild our mailing list following the cull of GDPR. So with the objectives set, the marketer and I sat down to look at what knowledge we had. Could we move on to the next slide? Information gathering is critical to integrating a campaign. The marketer will have audience knowledge from consumer insight and segmentation. The sales data will be available, including regional sales and where the product is over-indexing and under-indexing. Online customer reviews, hello Amazon, help us with product knowledge, and we really begin to understand the language and tone used by our readers. They are invaluable in developing successful messaging. We also had commissioned a large piece of consumer research into Joanna's current readers, and we also got the opportunity to test the appeal of the book to younger readers in blind reads. The marketer, of course, also brings media knowledge from the media buying agency. But I've found over the years that the PR is often able to counter this media knowledge. We're so much closer to their business. We have coffees with commissioning editors who know what strategy and direction the media outlet and editor have outlined. We're attending events where we're meeting the superfans and we're hearing conversations in queues. We have networks and relationships that help us understand the lifestyle and behaviours of our consumers, and we are able to take risks in reaching audiences that we would not risk seeking out if it required budget. So I think earned media allows us to be ambitious in range. What I think also is that paid media ensures we talk to difficult to reach audiences, plug gaps in our campaign, and really take the opportunity to layer the message. Can we move on to the next slide? So from our objectives, we could see we needed to reach a core older audience that were current or lapsed readers of Joanna Trollope. We also needed to reach a stretch audience of a younger 40+ woman who would respond to the themes of the books. It's critical now that the PR and marketers sit down together and examine the information and knowledge that we have. We look at the behavioural insight and use PR experience to map out our nudges to each target audience. Where will our reader find our book? Or crucially, where will we find our reader? Can we move on to the next slide? So this is our core audience for Joanna Trollope. We find the core reader on BBC Breakfast, The Telegraph, Good Housekeeping, Radio 4, and traditional events in local bookshops. The core reader follows the author on Facebook, and the marketing big piece here is they live in higher income towns just outside of London. If we move on now to the next slide to look at our stretch audience. Our stretch audience would find our author in Red Magazine, retailer blogs, lifestyle Facebook pages, and Instagram and commercial radio. So we can then look at these campaign keystones and decide what we can achieve through PR and what we need to pay for. We can see that PR could take care of some of the heavy lifting for the core readership, saving thousands of marketing pounds, or allowing us to divert it to readers in other parts of the media and retail landscape. But a campaign requiring a bestseller status over a number of weeks requires not just those all-important nudges, but a persistence that ensures that the campaign is unmissable over time. Can we move on to the next slide? So this is how we begin to talk to the core audience. These readers are hugely loyal to the author and highly engaged with her Facebook page. We pull our timeline together, plugging in our first key owned moments. We've now got a calendar where we can see our audience touch points. We look at the gaps in strategy and time and think about how we use the budget to fill them. So for our core reader, our tentpole media moments happen around publication. The activity in green that you see here is our earned activity. The week the book goes on sale, week 3, is critical for reaching readers who want to purchase as soon as the book's out. We organise readings in the bookshops that have loyal customers, high circulation newsletters, and highly engaged social media channels. Can we go on to the next slide, please? These readers are hugely loyal to the author and highly engaged with her Facebook page, as we said. And here the organic content and owned platforms are shown on the timeline in red, and they are critical to spreading the word. But if we take a look at this chart, we can see that the pre-order and publication activity, the earned and owned activity, core to readers, is quickly going to tail off. So we need to look at our paid for activity. Can we move on to the next slide? So the marketer and I can see that we need to extend the campaign with money. Paid activity is now shown in blue. Print ads in magazines run in where Joanna has earlier appeared in editorial. Carefully scheduled posts from our own platforms of this editorial extends the life of the earned campaign and amplifies it. And if we look at this timeline, we can see that in weeks 3 and 4, National Rail campaign is a way to keep reminding our regional superfans that a new book is available. Should we move on to the next slide, please? And then we repeat this process with our stretch audience. In this case, we think hard about the fact that these readers are less likely to come to us. We need to go to them. This novel is about 4 women working in high-flying jobs in the city. One of them sets up a charity. This is a fictional version of the charity SmartWorks. So this allowed me to approach SmartWorks to suggest we set up some events in aid of charity and secure PR that would draw attention to their cause. To this end, we had a key earned moment that provided an additional story. We had lifestyle shots of the author against the city skyline, and an article in the Sunday Times magazine contained case studies of women being supported to go back into the work environment. Can we move on to the next slide? We could also collaborate across our own platforms with these partners to spread the message more widely. Hobbs were existing partners of SmartWorks, and also keen to team up. Their urban venues were perfect for reaching a younger career woman in the cities that our data showed Joanna Trollope was under indexing. Whilst these events were usually less likely to convert to sales, they extended the campaign. They were regionally very targeted and provided message amplification for a longer period of time across our own channels, in addition to the channels of our partners. And can we go on to the next slide? So we needed to ensure that our message would reach 35 plus frequent book buyer on her way to work. And to this purpose, we put money across London Underground advertising with gorgeous, aspirational, full bleed 12-sheet campaign. And we talked to them via Instagram and Facebook posts, which were then scheduled and targeted towards these women. So here again, you can see our earned activity in green, our owned or the owned activity of our partners in red, and the paid for activity in blue. So I hope that gives a demonstration of the layering of those various channels. And onto the final slide, if that's okay. Ta-da, the result, it worked. We had a #1 bestseller that stayed in the top 10 for 9 weeks. Planning meant that we were able to show how we had achieved the results when the data came back in. And I really believe that a campaign that is strategically integrated really needs an integrated end of campaign report. It's absolutely critical. I think if there's one of the biggest learnings of proving the effectiveness of integrated teams, it's this piece of activity. It's really critical. So going back, we have our timelines recording all of our activity and targeting. We can then lay the TCM sales data to assess regional performance of our sales and sales across time, and really look at our media spikes as well. Our Cision reports are able to demonstrate where our events have enhanced our regional coverage. The Press Association is our friend when we are setting up regional book tours. And it also looks at how we are talking to our reader segments, of which we have 9 at Pan Macmillan. We also can use, of course, our media buying agency to show the footfall on our regional outdoor ads and for the London Underground. And then we analyse our sales in the proximity of these ads and the locations of our widespread events programme. Our paid for social analytics are then mapped against all of this activity. It takes a long time, very complicated. I wish I could show you one. Sadly, it's slightly confidential on the TCM, but it's really worthwhile. I'm sorry, the paid for was blue, yes. I think the other thing to add is at the moment, it's really difficult to automate reports that integrate and record all the activity you've done across earned, paid for and owned, and we end up collating them manually. But every time we do this, we learn something. We challenge our empirical PR knowledge and we understand more about our reader. We learn together as a PR and marketer and as a social media desk. And each time we sit down together to plan a campaign, we understand one another's abilities, methodologies, and strategies. It gets easier and our campaigns get better and better. And that's me. Thanks, Luke, for doing my colours. I was trying to remember without having the slides in front of me.
No worries at all. Thanks a lot, Emma, for going through that. That was really interesting. Just quickly before we move on to Anil, actually, just one question for you, actually. It's pretty clear from this that you've obviously your organization has gone a long way in terms of integrating these. Were there any particular challenges that you've kind of came across along the way of integrating these, or is there any kind of advice that you would give to people on how to go about doing this better, particularly if they're in an organization that's not really even started to do this yet?
Yeah, I think culturally, when we did this, everything the comms industry was much more offline. So I think that was a challenge, and I do think digital marketing, or online PR for book publisher Amazon, all of that data and all of that insight means it's easier to work together and set those objectives. But 10 years ago, we were culturally very different, and I think that was a challenge. I think I'm a big believer in reporting back, as Anil and I have talked about. And I think one of the things that we've found is, really working with our partners. So in this case, you guys at Cision, really making sure that we get our, the best kind of reports, and we work with, so we've got you doing that, and then we've got our media buying agency giving us their reports. And we also have our digital analytics run with sort of a digital desk in our company. And I think that putting that time into those relationships, those third-party relationships, to try to find some consistency across the reporting it takes a long time, it's difficult, but it's really, really worthwhile. I think one of the challenges that we had with Cision last year, and I was actually integrating our segmentation data, our in-house segmentation, with our press coverage. And I thought that was going to be almost sort of impossible, but I'm really delighted now that I can look at a year's coverage from the company, and I know which of our segments it's taking, because we took the time to do that well. And I think that's probably one of my biggest recommendations, is sit down and try to pull your reporting together. But the other thing is just listen and respect one another's knowledges. I think there's a lot of conflict between PR and marketers. And I as I say, I feel I'm both PR and marketing now, and I feel it's quite easy to switch in my head between those two. So that distance and sometimes, frankly, the antagonism between those teams feels odd to me. I think there's huge amounts of knowledge, huge amounts of creativity. It looks a little different in each of those teams. But when shared, it can achieve amazing things.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thank you for that, Emma.
Just to echo Emma's words, I know my colleagues at Cision wince when I say this, but you've got an agency, make them work for you. Don't do the work. They've got if you've been working with them on similar to how Emma's done or I've done, they've got the knowledge, the insight, they've got the expertise. Make them do the work for you.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Thank you, Anil. And that's a good transition into introducing Anil. So Anil, I'll hand over to you for you to go through your examples.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Anil Ranchod. I am head of press and PR at the Chartered Management Institute. I joined them in January this year, having spent 10.5 years at Stroke, the Stroke Association. So the example I'm going to use today is actually from one of my campaigns at Stroke Association, because it was one of the first ones we did where we actually integrated across the piece, bringing all our elements together for the biggest impact. And as like Emma talked about, it wasn't without its hiccups, its pains, but at the end of the day, when it was delivered and it worked well, we got the end result that we were aiming for. So the campaign I'm going to be talking about is called A New Era for Stroke, which we launched in 2017. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So our objectives were quite clear. In 2017, the stroke strategy, National Stroke Strategy, was coming to an end. And we wanted the government to replace the National Stroke Strategy. And one way we were going to try and do this was to secure 100,000 signatures for a petition that we were going to present to the government. So our objectives were pretty clear. We wanted to encourage supporters and beneficiaries to sign our petition. And we wanted to spread that message, spread the word through messaging and creative content across our owned channels and as well as our earned channels. We wanted to reach and engage new audiences through impactful insight-led content, i.e. through our media news story, but also looking at our paid-for social media content. We also needed to engage our stakeholders and influencers to advocate for our call to action. So that was reaching out to MPs, but also with partner organizations like the Chartered Society of Physiotherapists, the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, and the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, because they work quite closely with stroke survivors, and we needed their support and their interested parties to get on board with us. So we were very clear about what we needed to do as an overall project. What we then went on to do was look at how are we going to make this happen. So if we go to the next slide. With anything that's a major campaign, one of the things I always say is go back to your drawing board and plan. The first thing I did was pull together a working group, and that involved people from across the organization who had channels to reach our key audiences. From that, we set, working with those different individuals, we set about planning our launch date. So we planned to launch during Make May Purple, which was our Stroke Awareness Month, and that is launched at the beginning of May. The petition was allowed to run for 6 months, so that would take us through to the end of October, which was great because it helped bring together everything to culminate on World Stroke Day, which is the 29th of October. So the timing couldn't have been better for us. We looked at all our owned, earned, and paid for, and started to think about who are the audiences we need to reach, and how are we going to reach them and engage with them. So we created a single unifying message that was then adapted for each of our audiences. All too often I've seen teams saying, okay, that's the message, and you've got to use that message. You can't just have a one size fits all. You've got to adapt your message for your audiences so that it lands well. That doesn't mean you change the meaning or the emphasis of the message. It just means changing the language. Ours was quite simple. Help us create a new era for stroke. Sign our petition so that together we can conquer stroke. We identified a number of external events and activities, and also what I like to call our troops, which was our volunteers and our supporters, to help us achieve that goal of 100,000 signatures. We also looked at what were we going to measure in terms of evaluating success. Now, I often say, remember when setting your KPIs, to be exactly sure that you know how you're going to measure them, when you're going to measure them, and how. I was saying earlier on to Emma, too many times I've seen people say, oh, we want to increase brand awareness, or we want to increase awareness amongst, and then when you ask the question, how are you going to measure that? Nobody can answer the question. So then it goes back to, why have you got this down as a KPI? If we go to the next slide, that is basically, we looked at what are our owned, earned, and paid for channels. So under owned, it was obvious we had our in-house publications and our website, and then also our social media, that's our organic social media, but we also had, as I say, our troops, our ambassadors, our volunteers, supporters, our beneficiaries, who were helping us to get that message out to their nearest and dearest, but also engaging with the wider public. Our earned channels included mainstream media, so generating news content, but also targeting consumer and specialist media. And then looking at our partner and stakeholder channels. So as I mentioned, those other organizations, but we also worked quite closely with NHS England and their different local teams, as well as the national teams, to help get the message out there. We also looked at who were the influencers, particularly on social media, where we were talking about the impact of stroke. We were able to identify those people that were following us or that were engaging with our content and reaching out to them and giving them the collateral to create some influential articles. Now, traditionally, Stroke Association hadn't been an advertising charity. So this was a big move for us to kind of develop, put some budget aside that was then going to be used on our digital advertising. This was a new move for us, and we engaged with a media buying agency, but we also brought in an agency to help us create content that would land well with our key target audiences. If we go on to the next one, please. What did success look like? Well, we knew our overarching goal was to get the National Stroke Strategy replaced. And to do this, we needed 100,000 signatures for a petition, and we needed to get that within 6 months to result in a parliamentary debate. The different teams that we engaged with was PR and Comms to help create the news story, the social media activity, marketing, to make sure that we were producing the materials and the collateral needed by the volunteers, but also by other teams. So everything from posters to newsletters, etc. And fundraising. Working with the fundraising teams, we were able to give them the justification that made this made their ask easier for our local fundraisers on the ground. We worked with the campaigns and policy team to develop the campaign, the messaging, the research that was needed behind it. But we also worked with the research team to see, highlight the advances that we'd made over the last 10 years in relation to stroke improvements. And then, of course, we had our services and volunteering teams who basically helped us recruit the bulk of the signatures that we were successful in doing so. If we go to the next slide. So we knew we were successful because we managed to get 58,000 signatures on our petition, and the Parliamentary Council decided that we were entitled to have a parliamentary debate, despite the government saying no to a national stroke strategy. And then we had also secured blanket media coverage and social media engagement like never before. Our fundraising targets had been surpassed, and we had established a key relationship with NHS England at the strategic level. Our CEO was invited to sit on a panel which looked at stroke, and our volunteer engagement led to at least 50,000 of those signatures. We also brought on new supporters into the charity. But the biggest and foremost success was that a national plan for stroke was announced as part of NHS England's long-term plan, and that for us was the biggest win. Going on to the next slide, please. So my takeaway is there were clear goals, objectives. We knew who our audiences were. Plan, plan, and plan. I can't reiterate enough. We started 11 months in advance of launching this, and that's one of the core anchors behind our success. Be bold, be clear, don't be afraid to try something new. And also don't be afraid to review your plans. And if it isn't going, revise, adapt. If the last 12, 13 months has taught us anything, is nothing is certain, and you need to be agile and work and adapt to the environment and to the situation you're working in. And take on feedback. It's vital that you do. Now, I had a couple of poll questions. Look, would we be able to run our first one?
Yes, sure. Let's go ahead and run that. Cool. So that's now running. I'll give everyone a few seconds just to respond. Okay, just a couple more seconds and then we will, okay, we'll end the poll there. There we go.
Okay. And this is just so refreshing to see that at least over half of us know who our audiences are. It took a while, whilst at Stroke Association, for us to segment and prioritize our audience. But once we had, that just made life so much easier. And you then know how to adapt your communications and also look at not just the messaging, but the ways that you are reaching them. Earlier, Emma talked about how important it is that PR and marketing are working together. There doesn't need to be this constant battle. We're both heading in the same direction. It's just about bringing it together. Knowing your audiences is going to be crucial. You both disciplines have got insight that they can bring to the table when planning, and it's that combined insight that makes you more powerful. Our second poll question, please, Luke.
Yep, there we go. That's now available. So I'll just give everyone a few seconds. Okay, we'll call it there.
Yeah. Now, this is very telling. 20, that's nearly almost a quarter of us only somewhat know your audiences. We are PRs. I was hoping to see 90%. My recommendation is go back to your managers, go back to your directors, and start to segment your audiences, build an insight so that you know who your audiences are, what you want to talk to them about, what's the best way to not just reach them, but to engage them in your content. It's a few years ago, I remember when they talked about insight coming in and people were like, oh, what's that? What's that? It's the future. It's the way that you are going to be successful. Know who your audiences are, know where they are, know how to reach them, and know how to engage them. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anil. That was really great. Again, just before I move on to sort of like final sort of like takeaways and we go to the Q&A, and just again to remind people, the Q&A is available, so feel free to drop your questions in there. But similar question to you, Anil, actually, that I said to Emma, and I know obviously with you just recently starting a new organization, kind of coming in fresh, what are some of the key things that you would do or you would recommend for someone coming in that's looking to integrate these teams a little bit more, if that's not already something that's the case at your organization?
Well, that isn't the case at Chartered Management Institute. And one of the key things I'm doing with pieces of work I'm undertaking at the moment is segmenting and prioritizing our key external audiences. I've also established a key relationship with the marketing team. My coming into CMI is actually starting to embed an in-house PR team. So it's in the past CMI were using a PR agency, and it's hard to build a relationship between a marketing team and an external agency. So that's one of the things I'm looking to embed as part of the culture within within CMI, as part of the new ways of working. You know, as we all now start to return to work, my CEO, Anne Franke, recently said about returning to work, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to build, re-establish the grounds that we're going to be working on. Now is the time to make those changes so that it's a way of life. And I would thoroughly recommend that everybody thinks about using this as an opportunity to make the most of it for embedding new things into your organizations.
Great, that was really great. Thank you, Anil. Really appreciate that. Just before we do jump into the questions, and I can see that there's quite a few coming in here, so we will get to those. But I just want to quickly sort of round up and summarize a few of the kind of key takeaways from the session. So the first thing is that, you know, earned media is much more successful when it's amplified. So extending the reach of PR campaigns with paid is one of the key ways that campaign can become truly integrated. And we saw that today across both of the examples that were shared. Second is around leveraging media audiences across wider marketing activities. So essentially being able to identify who are the engaged audiences across your media campaigns and then retargeting them through further marketing efforts. And again, we've seen that today in those examples. And then finally, a point that we've made throughout today's session, but unifying PR and marketing across all aspects. So ensuring that we're aligned across the initial strategy and then the KPIs, and most importantly, having that consistent messaging. So I'm going to go through to the Q&A now, and we'll go through some of the questions that you guys have submitted. So we have a few here. So the first one we will go for, the first one is for Anil. So did you face any challenges from stakeholders with regards to putting some of the charity's budget towards advertising for the first time? And if so, how did you secure buy-in for that?
It would have been strange if I hadn't resistance. Partly there was this, how do we know it's going to work? Why can't we just reach them through organic? Why do we need to spend this? We don't have that budget. But actually, I think using the insight that we'd had from the agencies, we were able to show that we were going to be reaching audiences that aren't necessarily engaged with us, but who were within our target audience group, because they are the at-risk of stroke group. And nobody likes to think of themselves as being at risk at stroke. But the fact of the matter is, 1 in 6 of us will have a stroke in our lifetime. I am an Asian plus 50-year-old inactive male. Yeah, I've said it. I said I'm not active, but I know that I'm in that higher propensity to have a stroke group. So I put myself in the fire line and I say, so if I was talking to me and I wasn't working for the Stroke Association, how would I do that? And I do scroll through Facebook and I do pay attention to the adverts. So I know that, for instance, that does work. But there's other things that, other ways that people who aren't looking at it might be able to. So looking at advertising on other channels. And that's where the successes come in. We saw people downloading some of the information we were putting out, but also people taking up the challenge to sign the petition in this particular instance, and then going on to become supporters. Helping us basically recoup that cost.
Great, thank you, Anil. Next question could be to both of you. Maybe Ebba would like to go for this first, but this question is, what advice do you have for organizations where the comms team is covering everything? So media and PR, social channels, websites, marketing. How would you, what advice would you give to them to go about planning an integrated campaign where they're kind of responsible for everything?
I think that is typically, I think, the position of comms. I mean, that's certainly how we work. And I think it can be really difficult because people do have different objectives, even within a company. So a social media team might have an engagement objective or a traffic objective, and you as the campaign manager wants a sales objective. And I think first of all, give the people on running the campaigns the remit, allow them to do everything they possibly can, talk to them about what objectives they want to set. And understand that it doesn't have to be sort of 2 or 3 objectives. Actually, you can have a sliding scale of objectives. I think that, for me, is a really important part of working collaboratively. You know, I look after events for the company. I also look after partnerships, as well as the PR and marketing, which events and partnerships, of course, are a kind of owned media. You know, and I think that it's really important to listen to the people in your team, to understand what they need to get out of it, and really assist them in negotiating and conversing with the other people in the department to say, okay, this is what success looks like for me, this is what it looks like for you, how do we benchmark those together and really make the compromises, or actually to forge the vision of what proper success looks like with all of those objectives at hand.
That makes sense. Thank you. Another one, and again, this can be to either of you. What is your perspective on native advertising? Does it work? Does it appear authentic? And what kind of generally, what's your opinion on that?
Anil, do you want to go, or
You go. This is not one that I'm feeling confident on.
Okay. In general, I'm a fan, but it needs to be done really well. And I think the more I think about the questions we've had today, so much comes down to trust, whether it be, you know, whether it be with your immediate colleagues or with third parties. I'm not a great fan of something that is a features piece that doesn't sit naturally within the pages of some of the media outlet and just looks like ad. I just turn it over. And so what I think here is actually where PR is a really useful role in terms of setting up paid activity, because when I've done native advertising, I've listened actually to the features editor, not the sales department, and said, okay, here are 5 things I want to get for this campaign. What to you sits best in the editorial coverage of your team? And I've done that with News International, I've done it with the Telegraph, done it with and those relationships, when you say, this is what I want, but actually what looks best for you, that to me is when native advertising is at its best. And similarly, I mean, I think, you know, increasingly, and Anil and I talked at a different point about influencers and how, you know, it's becoming to be seen the territory of marketing, whereas my argument would be that influencers, again, are about relationships, because we all talk about wanting an authentic message, and we know that an authentic message comes from trust and being able to say, do you know what, to any YouTuber, etc., here's the book that I want covering, what do you think about it? Tell it to me in your authentic voice, in a way that puts your audience first, and I trust you to do that. But relationships are at the heart of that trust.
Great. That makes sense. Thank you. And actually, just a question to Anil, actually, because you just sort of touched on it at the end there, and there's a few questions relating to this around influencers and sort of where you see them sitting. Is that a PR or a marketing thing? And how would you go about determining where you could kind of put influencers within that bucket?
I tend to think about influencers as part of our comms approach rather than comms PR or marketing. And I encourage people who are keen to build those relationships to have them. It tends to be the PRs who have those relationships, working with the social media guys. And it's about conversation. It's not about chucking messages at them and expecting them to regurgitate. It's engaging in a conversation, challenging their ways of thinking, and using their reach to get your message out to a wider audience.
Great, that makes sense. Thank you. And then just finally, actually, there's one here that's directed to Emma, and that's around when obviously you mentioned around your organization, marketing is very ingrained in that, and you've done a lot of transition to that. So how did you find that transition from PR to marketing? And was there any sort of like training that you felt was needed, whether for you or your teams? Like how was that sort of transition?
I'm a big believer in being honest with your line reports about stuff you don't know. And for me, it's a moment, but I suddenly took on management of marketers, and I think, don't try to fudge it. Just learn. I mean, it's such an exciting part of working in comms that we're in a fast-moving industry, and people around you know a lot about this. So first off, just say, I don't know about this. This is your area of expertise, and I want to listen and I want to hear. You tell me about what it's like. And then I would always suggest sit and do one campaign with somebody from the outset, so you really understand the nuts and bolts of what they're doing. But yeah, I as most things, I think, be open and ask the questions, and I think yes, pride or would be your first stumbling block here if you weren't prepared to acknowledge where you're lacking in knowledge.
Great, that makes absolute sense. Yeah, thank you, and thank you to you both for answering those questions, and thank you again to everyone that submitted them. Just before we finish up, I just want to sort of go over a final kind of point. And I think, you know, from today, I think it's evident from our poll that we ran at the start of the session, as well as the conversations that we've had today, that making this shift internally isn't always the easiest thing. And it's not something that's going to be able to happen overnight at every organization. But from what we've seen today and the results that come from that integration across paid, owned and earned, I think it's clear that it's very much worth the struggle. And Emma said that herself actually in her part. So that's kind of what I want to leave us on. And I just want to say thank you very, very much to Emma and Anil for sharing their experiences with us today. And of course, thank you to all of you for attending and for submitting all of your questions. So yes, thank you very much. I hope everyone has a lovely long weekend, and hopefully see you all soon. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks. Happy Easter.
Thank you.